This question is for Ryan. Do you hear from commercial pilots? And what is one of the more compelling incidents you have heard from a commercial pilot recently?
Sure. Hear from commercial pilots all the time. It seems to be an increase of reports about, pretty close encounters. We've had recently this one's maybe not perfectly recently, but a 737 coming within 500 feet of a black triangle at about 15,000 feet as they were climbing, nose to nose, 180 degrees out. Both pilot and the co-pilot saw it. Air traffic control had nothing on their radar, described it the same. Centralized, glowing, I believe, blue light on the apexes of the triangle, as well as one in the center that was more purple, about 200 yards per edge. Bigger than the 737. 500 feet is very close. That's basically a merge, in a jet with another jet, set up a dogfight. So they were pretty shooken up by that event, as you can imagine. And this was actually the pilot that drug tested himself after the flight. Kind of deal with what he was seeing. And just recently we had another report of a relatively near miss with a black triangle as well, about 800 feet somewhere else. And there's another one that just popped up with a dish-shaped object that came within about 3,000 feet of a commercial airliner. I mean, there's so many. It's hard to even just highlight one or two that are, most influential. And it happens so repeatedly and consistently. It's it's hard to ignore.
Especially when you realize, Ryan, as you said, told Congress, it's only a small percentage of these pilots that even report them. So the other ones, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, Dick, you did a study, I remember. Didn't you do a survey? And maybe it's changed now, but there was only a very small percentage of pilots that were reporting anything, even back in the day when you were doing this, right?
Yeah, you're right. It's hard to get this kind of statistic, obviously. And you have to do estimates. And one of the estimate parameters has to be there's 2 men in the cockpit or sometimes 3. And how many of them in a given case will report it? And I have quite a number of cases in my files that only one will report it and the rest will stay quiet, basically. And raises the question why. And it could be job security. And I have a story about that if you're interested. But at any rate, the statistics are very, very hard. And I'm really hesitant to give you an estimate because it would be so biased. 1 in 20, 1 in 50, 1 in 100. Pick your number.
Right. And it's a miracle that we haven't had any crashes yet, mid-air collisions or anything. I mean, does that surprise you, Ryan? Or do you think it's because the technology of the objects is so advanced that they just aren't going to let that happen?
Yeah, I've always made the argument that the risk comes not from, from the objects themselves hitting us or something of that nature. It's how the pilot reacts to this and where they're operating to in the aviation flight environment, right? So, I mean, I got multiple reports of pilots being distracted at 1,000 feet as they're coming in to land at an airport, with aircraft full of people, and both him and their co-pilot just staring at a tic tac shaped object 1,000 feet off their wing and busting through altitudes, for example. Mm-hmm. So that's where I think the risk more lies is the pilot's reaction, whether it's a physical reaction and input to the stick, or whether it's a distraction that causes them to ignore other things. I mean, that's how every accident happens. With the systems in place now, it's never just, one thing smashing into something. A bunch of things have to fall out of place for an accident to happen.
Could I jump in here with a comment? I agree 100%. You put your finger on the prime concern. Years ago, when we were putting NARCAP together, we came with some justifications for doing it. And we developed a list of potential problems that might occur. And they included, as you say, from top of the list is an inappropriate control input to the airplane. But there's a dimension there out of a pilot may be very curious about the phenomenon. And so what we found some of them doing is trying to communicate with the object or the phenomenon. And they would wiggle their wings, or they turn on their landing lights or whatever, day or night, whatever, in trying to communicate with this phenomenon. Well, that's a distraction, clearly. There's no doubt about that. But there's also the possibility of an electromagnetic interference with some cockpit systems, let's call it, including radio and radar and direction finding and so forth. And in our database from years ago, we found approximately 20% of the total cases involved some EM interaction with the flight, with the airplane. But there's another dimension, and that is turbulence, air turbulence. And we found a couple cases, not very many, where passing through a contrail at altitude, for instance, you get this bump, and the passengers don't know about it. They're not warned ahead of time, and some of them will jump up out of their seat and so forth. Is there an air turbulence of some kind related to the phenomenon in flight? In which case, then the pilot also has to cope with that as far as control, and then messaging to the passengers in the back. So I agree with you that it's the first and foremost is how the crew handles the situation. Do they panic? Do they act impulsively and put the wrong inputs in? At altitude, cruise altitude, great majority of sightings we had in our database occurred at cruise altitude. Now, maybe that's changing. And from what you've suggested, it sounds like it is, which is a significant data point if that's true. And it raises the issue of drones, of man-made vehicles at lower altitude, and so forth and so on. I guess that would be my answer to your question.
You know, just real quick, another possibility for having more sightings down low could be the increase in automation capabilities at low altitude flight regimes, which allow the pilots to have their eyes out more often than they normally would.